Hi, my name is Abiola Seriki Ayeni, and I am an under 40 CEO.
The African Renaissance. The concept that the African people and nation shall overcome the current challenges confronting the continent and achieve cultural, scientific, and economic renewal is here, with young men and women taking the lead. Some call them the new school heroes. We call them under 40 CEOs.
Abiola Seriki Ayeni is a seasoned educator with a deep-rooted aim to deliver on the promise that every child has access to quality education and has the ability to thrive in school and in life. She is guided by these core values on the path to success. Excellence is a habit, integrity in all, and results without excuses. She holds a bachelor's degree from Pennsylvania State University State College, a master's degree from Columbia University, New York City, and a master's degree from Harvard University, Cambridge, Massachusetts, all in the United States. She served as the Senior Special Assistant Education to the former Lagos State Governor, Mr. Ayeni Ambode. Abiola Seriki Ayeni is the Director General, Office of Education Quality Assurance of the Ministry of Education in Lagos State. All right, welcome to Under 40 CEOs, Abiola.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And you?
Good, great.
Amazing, almost.
Thank you.
Now let's get into this. You attended Queen's College Lagos at some point. You were born in New York and grew up in New York.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about being born in New York, growing up in New York, and some of your fondest memories from that time?
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, thank you for having me here. Yes, I was born and brought up in New York. And, they say if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere, right? So, as a child living in New York, it's really a great experience. My parents were quite young when they started their family, so sort of like they're growing up together in so many ways. It was a fun household. Always had parties, always had people over, and I had a very happy childhood. Around the age of 10, my parents thought it was really important for us to move to Lagos and to have a better understanding of culture, so to speak. So moving to Nigeria was a huge learning curve for us all, especially the way in which children are taught, very teacher-centered, very strict, and it was interesting. But for a child of 10, in many ways, I felt like I was probably being punished. So I remember I would pray to God for my teacher to like me, because that's what in my mind it was interpreted as. But with that's the thing, the resilience of children. With time, I was able to adjust very quickly. So then, obviously, after primary 6, I went on to Queen's College, and it was also very different. We had classes that were filled up, and for all girls. So it was a good experience for me, and I think even when I think about when I eventually returned back to the US, the bonds and the friendships that I made within those 2 years, I still have them, and I still have been able to, or we have still been able to sort of maintain them, or maintain a semblance of our relationship throughout the years up until now.
Amazing. So when you moved back to
the US, yes, to New York, around 13, and at the time we lived in a flat, and it became a very important decision for my parents to consider if we wanted to move to a home, for them to purchase a home at that time, or if they would essentially pay for us to have a better education than the schools that were available locally. So, my dad didn't have to think twice, and they sent us to a boarding school in Connecticut, another state. It was a wonderful experience. I went to Catholic boarding school, and it was mixed. And I had roommates from Korea, Japan, Russia, a very much international setting. And it also took a little bit of adjusting. And like I said, I feel in retrospect, when I think of my childhood, there's been a series of different pivots and shifts that I've had to make that has made me more and more resilient each time I faced a different circumstance. And when I was 14, I got my first job. My dad actually helped me to get my first job in the city, in Manhattan. So I would take the train and I would, I would head over there and I would work, and then I would come back, and I was able to use that money to buy things for myself that I really wanted. I've always worked.
Wow,
yeah,
that's amazing. You attended the Penn State University, and that's where you got your bachelor's degree.
Yeah.
So tell me, what did you study at Penn State University, and why did you study what you did?
Mm-hmm. When I was preparing to go to university, there are many universities that I considered. There's a situation I actually recall now when I moved from my Catholic boarding school to a local school for some time, and we had a guidance counselor. And I brought out some universities, including Penn State. And because I was in a different state for high school, I lost about a year's worth of credits, while I was in high school. So, I was taking year 4 classes in addition to year 1 classes to be able to graduate on time. And, my guidance counselor looked at the list of colleges I wanted to go to. She said, no, why don't you, she was well-intentioned, why don't you consider going to a community college? Community college would be equivalent to like a Yaba Tech, 2-year. Why don't you consider going? And it's suffice to say that the school, didn't have many students of color there. We're just a handful, and we found ourselves very quickly. And that was, her take. And I remember going home to my dad and I said, no way are you going to this, I won't mention, no way is my child going to this. So he insisted that we apply to schools we both know I couldn't get into, and schools that I had a good chance of going into. And Penn State was one of them. If you were to ask me why Penn State is one of the best public universities in the US, and they have a great football team.
Okay.
But I'm not playing football, this is American football, by the way. And those are the things that influenced the decision to have me go. And I applied and I was able to get in. Now, in terms of what I decided to study, from when I was a child, I always wanted to be a lawyer. It's one of those things, if you go from a Nigerian household, the 2 professions and then the rest, right? My parents encouraged us to speak our minds very early on. I remember I would get into many arguments with my dad, and he would say, no mistake, it was a mistake to send me to America. If you are in Nigeria, you wouldn't talk to me like this, but that's part of the process that a parent goes through when you give your children wings and you're like, why are you flying too high? So, he was also able to balance that, and not really always see it as being disrespectful because I had a difference of opinion. So the plan was always to do law. And in the US, you can't get in law as a first degree. It's always as a second degree. So I decided to study English. I did like reading, I liked literature, I liked analyzing. I was just really good at it. And so that's why I decided to study English. And then while at Penn State, I realized that I could double major in African American studies. I really learned a lot about African literature, African American literature, and the history of African Americans in the US. And I think as an African in the US, right, there's sometimes a gap, right? There's a knowledge gap between when you get to the US and you see how African Americans are maybe being treated or their experience, and there are many assumptions as an African as to what has led to that. And I learned a lot within that time that really helped me to understand the African American experience, because surely I'm Black in America, and no one is going to ask, are you like American Black or are you African Black? In as much as I'm a Nigerian, because of my parents, I am living the American experience, right? So it was very important for me to educate myself on what that looked like, what that seemed like, because you find that those who have lived in America for generations, there are lessons they pass on to their children about resistance, about job searching, about so many things that they've learned along the way. One thing, for instance, is what to do when pop goes to be over. And African parents typically were not having these conversations with their children, not recognizing that in the US, your child is seen as an American, and there's a certain level of, double consciousness, I think it's called, that has to exist for your child to be successful in that space.
So you would thereafter attend Columbia University in New York for your master's degree. What did you master there? I think that was in 2006.
Yes.
Yeah.
So right before I graduated university, I was trying to figure out, the plan was to do law. And my senior year in university, I went on a missionary trip to Haiti with a Catholic organization. So we raised money, we were taking clothes, gathering used clothing, shoes, and the plan was to go to Haiti to visit an orphanage and to wear these wonderful gifts. So I went alongside a few of my friends. I think two of those friends of mine were Haitian American, and the others were Caucasian. And it was such a wonderful experience because, when I got to Haiti, I realized it was the first time that my Caucasian peers were in the minority in terms of, population. So they had never been in the space where there were very few whites and they were all blacks, right? And they were very intimidated by that. So even though I was not Haitian, but if I closed my mouth, no one knew that I was not Haitian. So I got there and people were coming to me and talking, and I would just nod, and they assumed that I was one of them. And you would see women holding, have backing their children with wrappers. And I'm like, wow, this is just like Nigeria. So the African influence there is still very much insistent. And it was a wonderful experience. And there was one particular experience where we were building boreholes, and we went to teach English. And that was the first time I ever stood in front of children to teach. Not that we had any curriculum or anything like that, but the children's eyes were just so glued on us. And, coming from a Nigerian household, we all know education is important. If you don't know, your parents will ensure that you know. So that part of me was just like, wow, these children are here and they sort of need me